How about now? Oh, I think I'm live.
Much better.
Excellent. Are we good to go? Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us for our discussion about self-sovereign identity. Thanks, Ian, for the introduction. I'm Allison Fromm, Chief Commercial Officer at Proofspace. We provide an identity platform for issuing, holding, and verifying credentials. We'll get into more of what that means from our expert panelists. So first, I'd like to ask Daniel Gasteiger, President and co-founder of Procevis, to introduce himself.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Daniel. I'm the co-founder of Procevis. I'm also co-founder of a couple of other blockchain companies here in Switzerland, among others TrustSquare, Verum Capital, and Nexus Squared. Very happy to be here. I was invited by the University of Zurich because of the project we did with them when it comes to student self-sovereign identities and master diplomas as verifiable credentials, which I'm talking about a little bit later. I'm also very happy to be here because of the partnership with this conference with my colleague from Czech Republic, with Parallel Polis, where I did some meetups already 2016 on the topic of blockchain, and with my first company I did some scouting in Prague and actually many other countries around Europe to find what at the time was not so easy blockchain startups. And with Josef, who is one of the co-organizers here, we did actually quite a few of these meetups in Prague, so super cool to be seeing these connections coming to Zurich, and having that sort of setup here is perfect. I'm also been a regular visitor of the Parallel Polis Hackers Congress in October, which usually took place before Corona in October, which again I think is sort of part of the co-organizational team here. And so it's great to see Zurich welcoming the team from Prague here in Zurich.
Thank you, Daniel. And our other Daniel Saeuberli, President of DDoS. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. So I really appreciated the invitation by Claudio to actually speak here and give a little bit of an impression on what is going on here in Switzerland in terms of self-sovereign identity. So I'm basically a corporate guy or legacy corporate guy. I spent a lot of time at IBM, where I learned very early about blockchain and the benefits to organizations and to governments. So I'm more, let's say, from a knowledge perspective on that side. During my career, I had various positions in organizations that kind of led me to believe that we need to do something in terms of bringing more privacy to the digital world. And with that, with a couple of partners, including Procevis and Hochschule Luzern, and Vasily Suvorov and others, we founded DDoS in 2020, actually as an organization that would be a body for stakeholders to come together and solution and discuss about the emerging topics of self-sovereign identity and the challenges that it actually represents when it comes to adoption, when it comes to educating the public, when it comes to standardization or finding consensus around standards. Also the aspects of technology are well represented, and within DDoS we kind of try to create value in a very vertical way. So each of the sectoral ecosystems can kind of experiment with the technology and come together to kind of drive consensus around the aspects of what is important to drive broad adoption. So with that, besides DDoS, I'm actually also a board member at TrustSquare, so really happy to be part of that W3 or Web3 ecosystem here in Switzerland. And we also help organizations, together with Vasily Suvorov, on actually applying the right technologies with a company called Accelerate to today's world, especially where it's important to establish a more ecosystem-based business model, as well as ensuring that trust is established in each of the interactions and transactions of organizations and individuals.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, I'm a member of GDAS, and Switzerland is incredibly fortunate to have such a great organization of bringing together different stakeholders to promote the principles of self-sovereign identity in combination sometimes with the Swiss government. So we're talking about self-sovereign identity. Maybe we can go back to you, Daniel. What does that mean? Can you break it down for us at a high level? It's become a buzzword, but what are we talking about?
Absolutely. So, I mean, self-sovereign identity, from our perspective, is there to be able to create verifiable transactions and interactions and ensure that these data can be verifiable, any kind of proof can be verifiable at any point in time with the notion of being privacy preserving at any point in time as well. So when you think about self-sovereign identity and the various roles in self-sovereign identity, you can think about the issuer of a certain information or credential. You can think about the holder of that credential, and you can think about the verifier that actually verifies a certain piece of information at a certain point in time of a transaction or an interaction. And there is a fourth body that actually is involved, especially when we want to make it adaptable by organizations and governments and today's society at large. That's the governing authority, when you wish, so if you wish, which actually puts out the rules under which this ecosystem actually operates. So thinking about some of the principles that are important is that you completely disconnect the verification information from actually the issuer. So you want to ensure that there is privacy in verifying that I am Daniel Saeuberli as part of, so maybe I'll show my ID card here because it's always a good example to kind of show that, because there are various credentials that you can see on my ID card. So if I am showing that ID card as a holder, I ask a verifier to verify that information, and there is trust established through a governing authority that actually issued this card or has actually put some security mechanisms and some mechanisms that allow the verifier to verify that the authenticity of the ID card at point of presentation. So now as we transfer this concept into the digital world, it's very hard to verify certain pieces of information. Obviously, most of you are cryptographers or know what cryptography is, and therefore you understand these concepts, but actually then disconnecting completely the ability of verifying from the knowledge of the issuer that that your ID card has been verified at a certain point in time is an extremely challenging undertaking in the digital world, and that's what self-sovereign identity actually is solving.
Yeah, that's an excellent summary. So you've got the issuer, the holder, and the verifier, and the challenge is to allow the holder to present their credential in a decentralized way so that it can be securely verified. And if I can just add on to that, since we're at the Ethereum conference and you're all engaged in blockchain in one way or another, one of the interesting things is that blockchains give transparency and verifiability of transactions. Privacy is more of a challenge. One of the things that verifiable credentials do is take data about the holders of those credentials off-chain. So the data, the claims, the data, the attributes of a credential are never stored on the blockchain, not in any way, not even in an encrypted way. The only thing that gets recorded maybe into a blockchain ledger is the decentralized identifier of the issuer. And so then when the holder of the credential goes to present their verifiable credential, which is a data standard, to a verifier, the verifier checks the cryptographic signature of the issuer, which is public, to verify the data that's in the verifiable credential. But from a privacy-preserving standpoint, that data is direct peer-to-peer from the issuer to the holder, and then from the holder to the verifier, and can be verified without the need to ever put the claims, the individual's private information, into a blockchain, which will be there forever. But the blockchain is used as a register of the public identifier of the issuer for verification purposes. And it can get a little more complicated than that, but we won't go into the weeds just yet. What might be helpful is if we take it to a practical example. So Dani, perhaps you could talk about what our neighbor Zug did in the early days with Ethereum using the technology.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as with many things, there was a very early on development here in Switzerland when it comes to using what I would call the concepts of self-sovereign identity that became prominent in 2016, I guess, with Christopher Allen's post and paper on the topic. This was then taken by the Ethereum ecosystem and developed into something what was called Uport. And then Uport, as one of the implementation options of a self-sovereign identity framework, was actually picked up by the city of Zug as the first real implementation, and I would say really early on, a bit too early on probably for a real productive use, and issued a first citizen digital identity based on self-sovereign identity concepts based on Uport in the city of Zug. So 2017, I mean, this was a really ahead of the times premiere when it comes to using that technology. And it went spectacularly good. At the time, Crypto Valley was really, anyway, a topic in everybody's mouth. The Swiss ecosystem was growing quickly into really, I guess, the global hotspot when it comes to blockchain technologies. Ethereum obviously being in Zug as the foundation since 2014 obviously had also a major impact on that. And so it was a good showcase. It was, I would call it a proof of concept, but it was done with real citizens, and the citizens, I think at the time it was 200-300 citizens that actually used this self-sovereign identity wallet, and they got issued the identity by the city of Zug government, really showcased how SSI could work, and that was really spectacularly good. At the same time, my inspiration to actually at the time start the company Procivis was a mix of that input. Also, my vision behind Procivis was that we should develop ecosystems around government-centric solutions and services based on a mobile technology that basically builds itself on self-sovereign identities. And so that concept then, we also tried to build like a pilot project like the Uport project for Zug. But when we talked to our government clients, we realized quickly this is far too abstract a concept for them to grasp. And specifically when it comes to decentralized technologies and something like the Ethereum network as the basis, something that they cannot control, this was obvious to us that this cannot work that way at that moment in time already. So we took some of these concepts of the self-sovereign identity, that we are a mobile wallet company, so we are only doing mobile wallet solutions. We've taken into account some of these paradigms of being in control of your data, being in control of sharing being in control of what you share with whom at what time, having a record of that, being able to reclaim your data. All of those concepts that were not so dependent on a blockchain or a decentralized technology, we put into our product. But then we stopped there and we really started building on top of traditional PKI-based infrastructure, so the governments could still control what they are doing. And I think, unfortunately, at the time, as I said, the City of Zug's project was a good showcase for SSI, but then, unfortunately, if you think about the average Swiss person or the average Swiss citizen that potentially uses such a thing in the long run, they're not conceptually not ready to basically deal with gas and all the concepts that are needed actually to make such a system work. And so the project basically stopped there. And I think, but it was really, really good showcase for Switzerland, for the Crypto Valley and the city of Zug to showcase how innovative even a place like Switzerland can be.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to continue the Swiss story moving forward with SSI, but before I do that, could I ask you one follow-up question? So when you have a self-sovereign identity credential in your wallet, how is that different from having basically a picture of my traditional ID in digital format? What's the benefit to having a self-sovereign credential in an identity wallet?
Well, it's the whole concept that comes with it, and the wallet that actually holds then the credential that you're basically being issued to. obviously means that it's in the world of self-sovereign. So you control what you're doing with that thing, and it's not something that can be taken away from you, because you're in possession of this. Obviously, we are now talking about, when it comes to the real applications that we now see happening, the SSI implementations of governments, or I would say SSI-like implementations. If you want to follow all the principles, it can never be government-issued IDs. But let's say it's something that is very close to an SSI implementation solution, like what's happening in Switzerland with the Swiss EID initiative now, that is currently being developed as a law, as a law that should go into place into 2025. Bases itself a lot on the principles of SSI. That's basically what we can then basically see as the advantage. If you hold in your wallet your identity card in a digital way, as Daniel said before, in a digital copy, basically a digital twin of the physical card. Once you have been issued that thing, you're in control, and that's I guess the main advantage.
And you could, please, Daniel, follow.
And I think, if I may add to that, also new methods and mechanisms can actually help to preserve the privacy of the holder throughout the life cycle of these credentials. And while they are presented, zero knowledge proof and other capabilities can really help you to be saving on data, so minimalistic on data sharing. So you can, for example, when you enter a club, you can actually just demonstrate that you're 18 years old and you're actually able to consume alcohol or whatever kind of services. And you can do that in the physical world, but you can also do that in some way in the digital world. So being able to demonstrate that you have the credential that is needed for a certain transaction or interaction in a very privacy-preserving way, I think, is the core one of the pieces of the core value of what self-sovereign identity promises.
Yeah.
And also, I think the combination of credentials. I mean, it's not just about one identity credential in your wallet. It's about having all these credentials together in one wallet. So having an ID, your driver's license, your master's student diploma, your whatever else credentials that eventually you will hold in your wallet. And then the fact that you can combine the content of these credentials, the attributes of these credentials in the meaningful way for a given use case, which is what we did with the University of Zurich student wallet project, that you can apply for a job, you use some of your credentials from the student ID, i.e. potentially your birth date and the name, and then the grades from your master diploma, and you can, through a job application process, share exactly that sort of minimal set of data that is needed for that very particular use case that you're actually talking to. And that combination of using the different credential content details is what also is very powerful in the future.
Yeah, I would agree completely. And I would add too, perhaps, that verifiable credentials present a very different way of managing our online identities. So instead of giving all of our data to third-party platforms in order to have an identity online, an account with our username and our password, we're giving up all of our data to these big platforms so that they can know who they are, but then they have access to our data and they're monetizing it to provide advertising to us. But verifiable credentials turns that equation in reverse, and we control all of our data, and we decide who we share it with and when and how. The example, I forget which one of you was using, where you can prove who you are and what age you are without giving up your address and your birth date and other information that nobody needs. And you keep control of that data privately yourself. Go ahead, Daniel.
I mean, the example of Daniel's credential of University of Zurich also kind of highlights the importance of interoperability, because when you kind of move towards Singapore or somewhere else in the world, you need to make sure that in some way this credential can be used in context with what we are trying to do, so applying for a job or whatever. I think that kind of highlights the importance of interoperability across ecosystems, interoperability across borders, interoperability across various aspects of using technology and using these concepts as part of technology. So I think it is vitally important that bodies like DDAS help to actually drive that consensus, not only nationally as we do it or focus on today, but also internationally, and get that input from a global perspective on what are the key standards that we can reuse. Switzerland has a great history of doing Swiss type of standards, and I can fully understand that because it creates value for the local kind of ecosystem and environment, and allows organizations to capture more value. But on the other side, it really challenges the way how these ecosystems work in the digital world, or should work in the digital world today.
Yeah, and let's stay on that topic of interoperability for a minute. So we've talked about the different building blocks of self-sovereign identity. One is the decentralized identifier, which represents either an issuer or a holder of a credential or a verifier. And we've talked about the verifiable credential. And both of those pieces of data need to have standards so that they can be used to communicate between the different parties. One of those standards bodies that Daniel just mentioned is the W3C. They register decentralized identifier methods. And I just checked this morning, I think there are 30 or 40 different decentralized identifier methods registered already, and this industry is brand new. And some of them, many of them point their decentralized identifiers to the Ethereum blockchain. There are some for Bitcoin, there's Cardano, there's Cosmos. There are a lot on Hyperledger, which is a private permissioned blockchain. And so one of the challenges that I think the industry needs to grapple with is exactly to Daniel's point. If you have an EID that's issued in Switzerland, but you want to travel to Singapore, how can you ensure that interoperability? How do you ensure that a credential I have here, like my physical passport, can be used to cross borders? And so I don't know, would either of you like to comment on some of the standards work that's taking place to ensure that interoperability and what the industry is doing to overcome that problem?
I mean, ultimately, I'm definitely not the right person to go into the standards discussions in detail about what standards are the right ones and the wrong ones. But what I observe when it comes to high level, the discussions and W3C's discussions around VCs and how long that took to get to a version 1 of a standard, this is exactly the problem. And that's where I think is a big challenge for this concept of self-sovereign identity, or anything that is dependent on global standards for it to work, and the ecosystems to build around these things. And to Daniel's point from before, Switzerland is famous for its federalistic system, its power to the people. The people are the highest sovereign when it comes to the democracy we are having here. But that also means that the decisions are always at the bottom, and in the context of the Swiss government set up, a commune in Switzerland has much more power than the Swiss government in Bern. And that's seen in the context of the work we are doing when it comes to standardization of what is everyday use cases for governments, like a citizen certificate of residence, or a certificate of a credit record extract, or criminal record extracts. All these credentials that are government issued, it's a huge challenge just to get them right from a normative perspective when it comes to what is this document actually saying about a person, and in each village it says the same thing about that person. And that's a work that we just started with the Swiss government now to normalize across 2,500 Swiss cities and communes a standard for certificate of residence, for instance. And that has nothing to do with self-sovereign identity, but that is needed in order for self-sovereign identity eventually to work, because these records are a crucial piece to the use cases that eventually will be created around self-sovereign identity ecosystems, to make them actually interesting for the citizens to use. And that's the end goal. It has to be usable in everyday life. It has to be meaningful in everyday life. Otherwise, concepts like this will never fly. And so there's many different interoperability challenges, the technical ones, what we just discussed, then the ones about the use cases and the credentials that are needed for these use cases. huge challenges, huge interesting opportunities to overcome, but I guess it will take quite some time until we get there.
Yeah, and I think, just as you were talking, I think self-sovereign identity really provides a unique opportunity for the communities to come together. So thinking about the blockchain community and thinking about the devs the brilliant devs that are part of your community today, and at the same point in time, sometimes not, going deep into how the real world works today, and therefore missing how a meaningful bridge can be built into an optimized future aligned with our principles and values as a community. I think it creates a tremendous opportunity to come together and solve, not only with the blockchain ecosystem itself kind of thriving on some of these technological innovations, but also kind of finding a way to come together with how the world works today and how we can truly create impact with use cases that are human-centered and that create value for organizations and that create value for societies and governments in privacy-preserving ways, and aligned with these principles that I think Christopher Allen very well put out, kind of walk the journey together. And for me, this is clear that we need to do this together. There cannot be just dev on the blockchain community side and then there's suddenly mass adoption in the real world. I think it really needs that strong balance. And I think self-sovereign identity, or the concepts around it, and that convergence of the world really creates an opportunity for the convergence of these worlds.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you hit on something that reminded me of a distinction I wanted to draw, where you talked about privacy preserving. That's a fundamental value of self-sovereign identity. And it comes back to that building block of verifiable credential and how does it preserve the holder's privacy. And can sometimes be confusion between an NFT and a verifiable credential, because they can do similar things, but a verifiable credential is not a flavor of an NFT. It's different in a couple of ways, and privacy there is the key. So with an NFT, all of the data about that NFT is stored on-chain somewhere. And that's fantastic. That's allowed incredibly robust and exciting use cases and economies and tokenomics that we've seen just exploding across the blockchain industry. And all of that data is stored on-chain. With a verifiable credential, none of the data is stored on-chain. So that's where the privacy comes in. Trying to use NFTs for identity use cases can be very dangerous because it would involve putting all of the individual's identity data into an NFT and recording it on-chain immutably forever. And there was just a really interesting presentation earlier about not just encrypting data for today. So you could have the best encryption in the world for my identity data that you put on chain in an NFT today, but it's got to last forever, because that's the beauty of a blockchain. The data is there immutably forever. And so putting identity data into an NFT, even in an encrypted format, and storing it on chain forever can be very dangerous. So while NFTs have fantastic use cases, what a verifiable credential does is take all of that private data off-chain, and it's issued directly from the issuer to the holder, but it can be verified using the blockchain. And that's where the interoperability and the global standards come from. And Danny, you mentioned the University of Zurich and ProSivi's use case briefly, but I think that's a fantastic example of the benefits that self-sovereign identity can bring. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you're doing there and the benefits it's bringing?
Yeah, the work that we historically through different channels, and I don't know if Claudio is here, but we've been working with Claudio Tesone and the team of the Blockchain Center since the beginning of the development of blockchain here in Zurich with TrustSquare and so forth. And we always said we should be doing something along the lines of a student wallet, a student ID, and obviously the precursor was this the timestamping solutions that were going around in Switzerland for a while now, where you basically put a timestamp, a fingerprint of a student's student diploma on a blockchain. But that then changed since the introduction of self-sovereign identity in the real world, especially with the Swiss government now looking down the concepts of self-sovereign identity for the future EID in Switzerland. That really gave it a boost, and we developed a self-sovereign identity platform at the company, and based on Hyperledger Indy, and we basically continued the discussion. And last summer we said, let's try out now this idea of a university student wallet that contains a digital version of a student card, which basically is exactly the copy of the Zurich University student card that we created as a verifiable credential, and then think through a couple of use cases that could come with such a wallet. And that's what we've done over the last 9 months. We have developed a system that across the university 100 students were using. So they got issued a digital version of their student card into a wallet of the University of Zurich. Then we basically developed a first use case around access management to a student event, where the student could authenticate them, or rather authorize themselves to enter the event by scanning a QR code and basically just share basic information about him to be checked on a guest list. That was obviously a very simple use case, but that's a very powerful one, because that can illustrate our use case as well, where you just show your with a zero knowledge proof you're above 18, and that's it. And so that's what we've done to showcase that thing, what you can do with an electronic way of identification in the real world. And then we said, okay, well, that's good, but let's think this a little bit further. We had a student event in September last year where we did some brainstorming. We did a demonstration of the wallet, came through with quite a lot of good ideas that we didn't think of, and we picked some of them, tried to develop them into real applications again. And obviously everything is proof of concept. This is not a live system. I have to obviously say that very clearly. But we then came up with the idea of a job application, and together with Swisscom and their HR process for applications, we developed a showcase of, if you have your digital master diploma, which we also created as verifiable credentials, both for science and arts students, and always the real students with the real certificates were using this. We processed basically then that job application proof of concept idea into a real application, and we just last week demonstrated that at the university at an event with the students, plus also some of the senior people from the university. And so we did really try to get these things to life, these ideas of verifiable credentials, how they look like. Our credo is always that we want to make them as intuitive as possible, so everything we are doing is typically just richly a visual copy of the physical world, that card of the university, so it just looks like the card. It's the same design, it's the same logos, the same colors, and the same thing for the master diplomas. There is, to the topic of standards again, there's no standard for a master diploma, how that looks like. It's not even in Switzerland universally standardized how a university issues a master diploma, and that's just not heard of, and let alone internationally. And so that's another thing we then started realizing, okay, we do this, we showcase this, but obviously there's a challenge. If you want to use that, and the University of Singapore, to come back to that example, can then scan the schema from the University of Zurich and recognize the content of that verifiable credential, that's not going to work. So there's a lot of work involved in standardizing academic credentials in the future. But yes, I mean, it's a good example. We had, as I said, we had about 100 students involved in all of this. We will publish a report about all of this. We'll do a public demonstration probably next month at the Swiss participation meeting of the Swiss government. And yeah, really cool use case. It's not something super unique. The university use case in the context of SSI is globally one of the leading ones. That's clear. That it's where the innovation comes from. The universities they see, and obviously a place like University of Zurich with the blockchain center is the spread is. It's obvious that something like this should be also tried here, but it's actually the first time I think that it was really so broadly implemented and so broadly demonstrated.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example. And I wanted to highlight one thing you said. So the decentralized identifier of the University of Zurich, who's issuing the diplomas, is being stored in a private permissioned Hyperledger Indy ledger.
Yep.
And the idea is that as this ecosystem grows, that credential could be combined with credentials issued by others. So maybe there's another credential issued by an issuer who uses Ethereum as the register for the decentralized identifier of the issuers. Maybe someone else is using Bitcoin as the ledger to record the decentralized identifier. And I've heard some people in the US government who are working on self-sovereign identity applications, they're not even thinking to use blockchains as their ledger for decentralized identifiers. They're thinking to use a US government website. So as this ecosystem grows, yeah, I think I heard someone roll their eyes. It's typical, right, of the US government. As this ecosystem grows, we need a way to combine these credentials just as seamlessly as we use the internet today. I mean, you can use any web browser and access any website. So I think that's one of the interoperability and adoption challenges that the industry is working towards.
And maybe if I can mention, as you also spoke about experimentation, currently the Swiss Bund, and maybe just a step back, the Swiss Confederation is working very collaboratively and participatory on the creation of the EID law, as well as on the creation of the selection of the architecture that is being used for deploying that trust infrastructure for Switzerland. On one side, it's interesting because you as a community are invited to actually experiment with them and learn with them as they are looking for new ways of actually driving how should I say, maturity into the various aspects of the technology, the governance, the standards, as well as the skills and capabilities of the people involved and the departments involved, and also the civil society and also the organizations that ultimately will benefit from a trust infrastructure like this, because it will not only hold the aspects of EID, but it will also allow organizations and individuals to issue verifiable credentials into such a trust infrastructure, which runs on the basis of SSI principles. So what is going to be important is that experimentation is going to be driven by as many parties as possible. So if you go to the government website, you will find a way to interact with their sandbox. We as DDoS, we started like 1.5 years ago to deploy such a sandbox and have our members and associate experts to learn and experiment with it. But it also is an opportunity for ecosystems like yours that you can contribute to the further development of that architecture and the further development of how the technology is going to be applied in the future. So on this notion, I just want to mention quickly that we recently had a post on the ARF. The ARF is the architecture reference framework that has been issued by the European Commission. So as you can see, there are many initiatives across the globe, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's Canada, whether it's the EU, whether it's in Singapore, whether it's in Switzerland. And you can see that all of these initiatives, by the way, also in third world countries or global south countries, and all of these countries have different needs and aspects that they want to drive into these ecosystems in terms of how privacy preserving should they be, how strong of cryptographic methods should be used, etc. So we issued a blog post on the ARF that was published by the European Commission, and we invite you also to kind of look at that and be aware of what's going on in the real world in self-sovereign identity, because it's so important that the aspects of the broad stakeholder base is going to be finding its way into that consensus. I wanted to highlight that.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And I think we have time for a question from the audience. I'm getting a little bit of a mixed message here, but All right. Can we take
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you very much for the conversation. Great job, Allison, moderating everything.
Hello.
We have time for questions. We have time for interaction and so on and so forth. I have a couple questions myself, but I throw it out to the audience immediately. Yes, sir, right here. We have a mic already over here. Good. Super. I'm told to stand in the middle of the stage. Yes. Good. Turn on the microphone for the gentleman, please.
I can repeat.
We can hear them.
I would like to
There we
think
go.
more like practical attitude and probably more like, you know, I was recently in Israel, and they have pretty much automated their public transport system. So if you miss to get a ticket for the transport system at the airport, as an external, you have no chance to get, you know, permission. So I had to write black. How do you say that? So I could think about, you know, that why is not this identity thing connected to people, you know, being on travel, like, you know, helping them, you know, to get there what they need as a foundation at their destinations they're going to have stuff like communication, insurance, cash flow, and all this kind of stuff. And really take care for these people, because, you know, there's, you know how many Americans don't have a passport and so forth. So maybe we can concentrate on the ones, you know, being in the flow and try to, you know, establish for them, maybe temporarily, at least for the time of the travel, some support for identity management.
So is it okay if I take it? Or at least to start? So I think it's absolutely vital what you're saying, and that is maybe one of the misconceptions of or the problems that we are facing. So how do we drive the adoption for the traveler? How do we ensure that the services can actually be designed in a way so they use verifiable credentials as part of everyday life? Whether it's traveling in abroad, or whether it's actually looking at your health record, or whether it's actually looking at whatever kind of interaction you need to do within your day-to-day life. And the beauty of verifiable credentials as they would be adopted is that, and Danny mentioned it earlier, that combination of multiple verifiable credentials into something that makes sense, or that something that would be available to a smart contract to actually execute on. So you could actually think about a frictionless future of buying a house, because all of the proofs could be obtained in a digital way, and could automatically be processed alongside the use case of buying the house and all of the regulatory aspects of what needs to get done to execute on that transaction. So you're absolutely spot on, and I think my colleagues will definitely have also a word on that, or certainly on adoption. Yeah.
I completely agree, and the only thing I would add is the importance of verifiable credentials, because as we create that frictionless experience that you were asking for and Daniel referenced, the thing to avoid is feeding all of our data about everything that we're doing, every movement we're taking, everything that we're buying to some centralized entity, whether it's a government or a company. We don't want to give all of our data away and allow ourselves to be monitored with every single thing that we're doing. So how do you create that frictionless, smooth, easy digital experience and preserve our independent privacy? And verifiable credentials really are a huge step towards exactly that.
That is the holy grail. One more question, sir, or two, and then we move to the next speaker. Okay, up here then.
Hi, thanks. Not sure if you were like following recent research and like, you know, what community is also building with decentralized societies. Yeah, so basically it's more like a concept of rather having identity system built based on verifiable credentials, right? You have like more sociocracy, right? Soul-bound tokens and this kind of mechanisms. Yeah, it's open. It opens basically like really like the doors to more decentralization in that matter, right? Because like one of the problems with verifiable credentials is that, you know, an authority of like providing some credential itself. Yeah, so curious to hear your thoughts and if you thought that, you have anything experience about that.
Yeah, I remember from the discussions back in the time at when I was regularly in Prague, and the discussion around Liberland, I think it was at the time, that was going in the direction of a decentralized, totally decentralized country approach. And at the time also the discussion around real self-sovereign identities, in the case of you create your identity yourself and you choose who actually attests for whatever identity element that you have. I mean, these are all the great concepts. These are all the things that also motivated me to really get engaged with all of this. Unfortunately, the reality is something that is not quite ready for something like this yet. I think we are struggling, and in Switzerland specifically, since more than 10 years now, to get a government-issued digital identity to use in everyday life as it is now. And to go to that next step, I think society, at least here in Switzerland, we're just not there yet, unfortunately. But it's obviously the end game and the end state. But I think it's just not the right time just yet. But if I can make a last comment, I don't know if it says finished here, but if you're interested in this topic, I would like to make a quick announcement about the Decentralized Identity Unconference that will take place here in Zurich on 7th to 9th of June. It's going to be a 3-day event on this topic of self-sovereign identity, centralized identities, in the format of what some of you might know as the Internet Identity Workshop in California that takes place since 18 years. That's really where this topic is being discussed at the real detail level, and at such a concept and any other technical concepts and any other philosophical concepts around identity can take place in an unconference fashion. That means it's not like a conference where you go and sit and listen to somebody in front of you, but where you actively create the agenda by giving input in the morning, and then teams are formed around the topic, and then you can actually discuss these things in great detail. Unfortunately, that's not possible here today, but if you're interested, if you go to the diceeurope.org website, you can see the details around that conference. I highly recommend it. It's here in Zurich at Trust Square. It's the first edition in Europe, and we're super excited together with DDoS to organize it.
Super. Very, very good. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the great discussion. We'll wrap things up there.
Super.
And move on to the next speaker.